Hi there, Dr. Dan Newsom again, and thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed Module 1. We're going to kind of recap Module 1, and we'll jump right into Module 2 here. So, first off, we discussed what is an autoimmune disorder, and yes, they are where the immune system seems to be attacking the body, but we also covered that it's that the immune system is misguided. It's lost the ability to differentiate between who's the good guys and who's the bad guys. We discussed how autoimmune disorders normally are systemic, and they involve multiple organs, multiple tissues, all at the same time. We talked about how these things are on the rise, particularly diabetes and Hashimoto's, and in other digestive autoimmune disorders. They're all on the rise. And we discussed how these things are due to the fact that our food, water, and air have all been weaponized against us. So, this is just kind of a big picture view here. Well, let's hone in and look at autoimmune disorders a little more closely. In order to back your way out of a bad situation, you got to understand how you got there to begin with, right? So let's discuss this. Okay, in every autoimmune disorder, in every chronic illness for that matter, there's one formula, and it always leads to the same place, okay? This formula is what I call the 3 I's. They are irritation, inflammation, and infection, okay? You'll find all 3 of these in every autoimmune disorder. You'll find all 3 of these in every chronic illness. Okay, so the formula is irritation, inflammation, infection. I call it the 3 I's. Now, let's just kind of jump into this a little more closely here. Okay, let's talk about irritation. So what are you talking about, Doc? What's this irritation? Okay, well, irritation is anything that provokes an inflammatory response in your body. It could be a spat with your spouse. It could be mercury. It could be a hamburger. It could be all kinds of different things. There's everything that provokes a inflammatory response in your body is an irritant, okay? So that is our definition. Let's move forward. Let's just talk about food for just a minute, okay? Because food's a big deal, right? Everybody eats. You have to eat, right? So food is 3 different things. Food is energy from the sun stored and packaged in phytonutrients, right? And all the different things in the plants, right? Then we have nutrients. Okay, this is vitamins, minerals, amino acids, fatty acids, all these different things. And believe it or not, food can also be an irritant. Okay, what is nutritious for one person can be poisonous for the next. Okay, what's nutrients for one can be poisons for the next. That's just how it works. So let's say you have the same thing. Every morning you eat oatmeal. Let's just say, so you have oats every morning, okay? After about 90 days of eating that same thing every day, day in, day out, every day, that continuous exposure of oats to your digestive system, after about 90 days, the oats become an irritant. Okay, your immune system starts saying, okay, I've had enough of this. All right, let me give you an example. It's kind of like the neighbor that comes over right as you're sitting down for dinner every night. Okay, they come over every night, and they just want to tell you about the rest of the neighborhood or the weather or whatever. But every night, just as you're about to sit down with your family to eat, they're knocking at the door, ringing the doorbell. And, that's okay if for a few nights, but man, eventually that becomes an irritant, all right? Well, just as continuously eating the same thing becomes an irritant to your body, it's the same situation. I hope that makes sense here. So a irritant, okay, triggers a toxic response. Your body has this toxic response to that, which is an inflammatory response, all right? This is exactly what happens in celiac, in irritable bowel, in all your food allergies, okay? We call these food allergies, but what it is the immune system has been irritated and it's having this inflammatory response, and we call it a food allergy. So, inflammation is swelling, okay? Swelling is excess water in a certain area, okay? So in your body, if you have swelling somewhere, it's because there's too much fluid or water in that area. The primary function of swelling is, if it's in a joint, swelling is there to splint that joint so that it can't move. If it is in some other tissue though, typically swelling's job is to come in and dilute the toxins in that tissue into parts per million or parts per billion. Okay, so it's trying to get in there and dilute the toxins that are, that you've been exposed to. So think of eating something that didn't set well with you. Okay, it gets down into your gut. What happens? Your gut swells up. All right, we call that bloating. Okay, that's a response from your immune system to something toxic. Something in the food was toxic. Your body had a bad response to it, and that response was a swelling, inflammatory response where the body tried to dilute those toxins and make them less harmful. Let me give you an example. Let's say you get a sliver in the bottom of your foot. Okay, you get stuck in there. What's the first response? First response is pain, initial swelling. Okay, and it was an irritant. That sliver was an irritant in the bottom of your foot. The foot hurts. It starts to swell up in that area, right? So that irritant triggers this inflammatory response, right? This is what I'm talking about. Same thing. Okay, anytime you get intoxicated by anything, your body has an inflammatory response of some sort, okay? In the short term, that inflammatory response is good because that extra fluid comes in to wash away those toxins. If the body is not draining properly, or if you're overly intoxicated, or if you're very consistently intoxicated, that trigger, okay, that toxic trigger to your immune system is constant. Okay, and so your immune system gets triggered, has this inflammatory response, goes through the inflammatory cycle, starts to feel a little better then, and all of a sudden, because that irritant, no one's pulled the sliver out, right? It triggers that inflammatory response all over again. So one of the things that is very, very, very common in autoimmune disorders is that they are cyclic. The symptoms are cyclic. They get better, and then they start kind of leveling out, then they feel worse again, and then they start leveling out, then they get better, and it's a cycle like that over and over and over again. Well, that's because you're in an inflammatory cycle, and there's toxins and irritants in the system that are triggering that, okay, and they haven't been eliminated, therefore they just continue to trigger that. So when inflammation becomes a system-wide issue, it starts to change the internal environment of the body, okay? And I want you to think of your cells, think of cells as if they were little houses, okay? And those cells they all have toilets, right? And they flush their toilets. And contrary to your house that's hooked up to a sewer system and there's plumbing and whatnot, when your cell flushes the toilet, okay, all that waste goes right outside into the extracellular fluid. Okay, so the water that surrounds the cell, okay? If your lymphatic system isn't draining that extracellular fluid, if that's not draining well, if the lymphatic system is backed up, if it is toxic, if it's already filled with toxins, that's just like the sewer system in your neighborhood being backed up, okay? Starts causing problems with the houses, okay? When that happens and your cells can't eliminate very well, they start to swell up, okay? All tissue, any tissue, when it swells up, okay, the fibers in the tissue start to separate, okay, making that tissue hyperpermeable, okay, so it's easier to penetrate. And so when the cells start to swell up, they become easier to penetrate. Toxins have an easier time getting into them, causing them to swell even more. Okay, so when you have a swollen, toxic environment around the cells, it starts to affect the cells themselves. The cells swell up, they become more permeable, and now you have, we go right back to this whole inflammatory cycle I'm talking about. So when the cells are irritated, they trigger the immune system to have this inflammatory response. Inflammatory response occurs to try to wash out the toxins. But when the toxins don't just wash out, they stay there triggering that inflammatory response over and over and over again. So let's talk about, just so you understand this, let's talk about water for a minute. Let's say we went to the hardware store, we buy a 5-gallon bucket, we sterilize it, okay, and then we fill it with distilled water, pure H2O, okay, there's nothing in distilled water, right? So we put that in this bucket, we take it out to the road in front of your house and we leave it there right by the roadside for the next 6 weeks. So we have stagnant water sitting in a bucket for 6 weeks. 6 weeks later, that pure, wonderful H2O that was in that bucket will be contaminated with all kinds of things, right? It's going to accumulate everything in the environment, right? I have some news for you. Your body is 70% water. Okay, since you're 70% water, I'm 70% water, our bodies are 70% water, that water in our body doesn't operate any different than the water in that bucket. Okay, the water in that bucket accumulates its environment. The water in your body accumulates your environment. So everything that you come into contact with, the water in your body picks it up. The water in your body absorbs your environment. Okay, water has this property, in chemistry we call it, it's adhesive. Okay, meaning things stick to it and it will stick to things. All right, that being the case, the water in your body sticks to the toxic things that are in your environment. It accumulates them. It grabs hold of these things as you come into contact with them. So as your body becomes toxic over time because of the environment we live in, your body's accumulating all these toxic waste and all this toxic stuff, and it is basically the water in your body is getting dirtier and dirtier and dirtier. Okay, all those toxins that are accumulating in the water, the extracellular space, and the inside the cell, intracellular space, is constantly triggering this inflammatory response. And this inflammatory response leads us down a path, okay, a degenerative path. And I'm going to give you an example of this, okay? Let's say we go to the hardware store again, all right? We buy a 2x4. We take that 2x4, we set it between two chairs, and I put my foot on it, I step up, I can step back down again. You put your foot on it, you step up, you step down again, right? Totally fine. The 2x4, let's say 2-foot piece of 2x4, it holds us, right? It's got structural integrity. It's a tough little piece of wood, right? We take and we soak that piece of wood in the bathtub for 3 days. Then we bring it back out, all swollen, right? Because it swells up because it absorbed all that water, right? and we put that between two chairs. I put my foot on it and I go right through that piece of wood. If you put your foot on it, you go right through that piece of wood, right? Why? Because swelling destroys structural integrity. If you have lupus, if you have rheumatoid arthritis, if you have any of these structural autoimmune diseases, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay? The structural integrity of your body is deteriorating. Well, it does that because it's inflamed. If my formula here, this irritation, inflammation, infection formula, if that was wrong, I ask why in conventional medicine do we prescribe corticosteroids for a flare-up in an autoimmune disorder? If it wasn't an inflammatory issue that we're dealing with, why would anti-inflammatories work so well? So put that in the back of your mind. Think about that for a minute, okay? Irritation triggers our body into an inflammatory response, right? If this irritation continuously triggers this inflammatory response, like a snowball, it starts to gain in mass and size and influence throughout your body as it comes rolling down the hill, right? Okay, so as that snowball just snowballs, right? And it grows and grows and grows, what happens is we create this wet, swollen, soggy body, all right? So internally you get this gross, wet, swollen, soggy environment, kind of like a swamp, okay, versus a swimming pool. And so in that swamp, with your immune system trying to move around in that swamp, okay, it gets blinded because it's swimming in murky water. It can't see, right? Versus if it was swimming in a swimming pool and it was nice and clear, it could differentiate between who's in front of me and is this my buddy or is this not, right? This has a compounding effect in our body. So it may start in one area, but as it moves out from there, it's almost like this inflammation starts infecting our entire body. Okay, and it's a progressive process. And so the degeneration becomes progressive. How many of you have heard this from your medical doctor that you have a progressive degenerative disease? Okay, how many of you heard that? So this is how it progresses. So I want to ask you a question. So DNA, right? If you understand what DNA is, okay, this is your body's blueprint. What happens when the environment around every cell in your body is dirty? Okay, and your cell, all that murky yuckiness starts to penetrate and get inside your cell, and inside your cell is holding that blueprint, DNA, your body's blueprint, right? What happens when the water that DNA is floating in becomes contaminated? It becomes dirty, okay? It becomes, wet, soggy, gross, okay? What happens is your DNA responds accordingly, okay? What that looks like is genetic mutation, okay? This is called epigenetics, okay? And when that internal environment inside the cell becomes so toxic and so dirty, so messy, that things aren't being well regulated within the cell, the DNA responds accordingly. Okay, and we start switching on genes that we don't particularly want switched on. These could go toward, this may be the initial trigger that sparks all of the cascade of events that created a autoimmune disorder in your system. Or it may lead to inflammatory issues that take you down the path to cancer or to heart disease or to any of these other problems, okay? But it's environment around the cell affecting the cell, which as the cell becomes swollen and hyperpermeable, the environment penetrates the cell. As it penetrates the cell, the DNA inside the cell responds accordingly and starts sending faulty messages all over the place. Okay? So in this wet, soggy, swollen environment, it's real easy for tissue antibodies to start being developed. Okay? Because the tissues are rotting just like a piece of wood. Okay? Just like a piece of wood would be swollen and rotting. Okay? As your tissues are rotting, it's really easy for your immune system to develop antibodies to that rotting tissue because it becomes a toxin in and of itself. Okay, so which triggers more inflammation, which compounds the problem. This just gets worse and worse and worse and worse. Just like the bucket of water I was talking about earlier, when you have swelling and it's long-term and it's chronic, that water in your body becomes stagnant. It's not moving, it's not circulating. Okay? Any tissue that has inflammation has reduced circulation, meaning blood doesn't get into there very well, it doesn't bring nutrients as well, and it doesn't clear toxins and take them away very well. Okay? It's the difference between your immune system marching down a nice paved road versus trudging through a swamp. Okay, when you have a swamp, your immune system gets tired and regulation doesn't happen quite as well, right? So just like that bucket of water becomes contaminated and then starts growing different microbes in it, the stagnant water or swelling, inflammation in your body, water does the same thing in your body as it does in that bucket. It starts accumulating everything it gets in contact with. With time, this brings about infection. Okay, this sets the stage for infection to happen. So we have irritants triggering an inflammatory response in our body, our inflammatory response snowballing because the irritants haven't gone away, and this inflammatory response is being triggered over and over and over again. So this is a horrifically vicious cycle, but we can break it. And I've got some good news for you. So here's the good news. All of this can be reverse engineered. Okay, think about it. Just like a flooded basement, okay, the process of fixing that flooded basement is similar to the process you need to go through. Okay, so first, you have to dry up the basement. Okay, how do you do that? Well, you got to remove all the junk and get all the junk out of it, get the fluid out of it, right? Get all that out of there. Then you start cleaning it up, all right? Then you can repair it. Okay, if you try to repair it while it's full of water, that's not going to work. Okay, so in your body, we have to remove the irritants. Okay, we have to take the things that are triggering this inflammatory response out of the environment. Number one, as we do that, that will reduce the triggering of that inflammatory response. As that inflammatory response starts to burn itself out, if you will, or cycle itself out, everything starts to dry up. Okay? If there's infection involved, the infection starts to get resolved because the infection needs that swamp environment in order to grow. Okay, so we need that wet, soggy, swollen, nasty environment in order to grow the infection. So if we take all the irritants, remove all the toxins from that environment, we reduce the swelling, dry it up, there's no place for the infection to survive in, right? So your internal environment goes back to normal after we remove the irritants and we dry the system up. Okay, so what I mean by drying the system up is we stop this inflammatory process. We slow this thing down so that your body goes back into a healthy inflammatory response. I want you to follow the steps that are laid out in this course. Okay, it is extremely important that you go through these step by step. Okay, these are stepping stones across the river. Okay, if you jump from one to the other, chances of falling off into the river are pretty high. Okay, so I want you to be very careful to follow these step by step. And you want to work through each of these as their own rock in the water, right? So I promise you, I will show you how to get yourself out of this. Okay, you want your life back, and there's definitely a way to get there. But you don't bake a cake starting with the icing. Okay, there's a whole process in baking a cake. Then you put the icing on the top, right? Just like that, if you don't understand how you got to where you are, you can't figure out how to get to where you want to be. A vibrant, healthier version of you. So let me help you. Let's do this together. Okay, so we made it through Module 2. Let's kind of recap what we went through, what we discussed so far, and then I'll tell you what's next. Okay, so we covered irritation, inflammation, infection, the 3 I's. Okay, the 3 I's are the formula of what is occurring in all autoimmune disorders, all chronic diseases in general. Okay, we discussed irritants, that irritants can be all kinds of different things, everything from emotions to heavy metals to all kinds of toxins, and today we covered food. All right, we'll talk a whole lot more about all that in Module 4. But we talked about how the immune system responds to irritants with this inflammatory response, right? So it has this inflammatory response, and that if that's left unchecked, it becomes chronic. And if it becomes chronic, this becomes cyclic, and it goes over and over, and it grows and grows and grows. And as that swelling, that inflammatory response, all that swelling permeates your body becomes a soggy, wet, nasty swampland inside, right? Which is the perfect environment for infection. Okay, so when that irritation triggers the inflammation becomes chronic, that makes the body a really easy place to infect. All right, when all that comes into play, we create the perfect environment for an autoimmune disease to occur. But all of this can be reversed. We remove the irritants, we dry up the swelling, and the infection goes away. You become a vibrant new version of yourself. Okay, so let's talk about our next module. In our next module, we're going to cover a very, very key component to all of this. It's called gut health. Okay, autoimmune disorders start in the gut. Just tidbit. Fastest way to create an autoimmune disorder is to reduce your body's acid in your stomach. Okay, reduce stomach acid production. We'll expound on that a whole lot more. Okay, but it's super important to understand how to heal your gut so you can heal the rest of your body. I tell everybody, heal your microbiome and your microbiome will heal you. All right, thank you very much. We'll cover all of that in Module 3. This is Dr. Newsom. Thank you for joining me.